Hello, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. The things I'm about to tell you are critical for your comprehension and for the purposes of being birthed into this corona period. I will be taking my time and being slow and methodical as possible. When I say slow, I should say steady. So if you folks out there need to put up the speakers, by all means do so. I had little or no time to prepare for this, but it is critical information that you need to know. Some of which I've already covered. But for the rest of it, which is like almost 80%, there will be new knowledge to you. 1 is that a few years back, there was what's known as a block size wars. This block size wars was the critical aspect that allowed Bitcoin to be what it is now. That is to say, and I'm looking down at the notes here, and I'll read it off because it is a pivotal moment in our history, which took place in 2014, I think it was, and won over that particular battle in 2016. It says on my notes, on the surface, the battle was about the amount of data allowed in each Bitcoin block. However, it exposed a much deeper issue, such as who controls Bitcoin's protocol rules. In other words, as early as 2016 to 2014 to 2016, the rulers, because wherever there is a rule, there has to be a ruler. And that ruler is usually of a principality. They nearly successfully hacked the Bitcoin, the integrity of that blockchain. The outcome would have been that some Bitcoin holders will have a greater value than other Bitcoin holders will do so. In other words, creating, once again, the medium of disabling men and women not to have their full worth as to what these coins are, just as in the currency market. The profound statement which I have only recently come across, and it's not my discovery, it's not me publicizing it. There are very famous Bitcoin champions that are out there that I got this information from. I was totally unaware of this battle that was taking place. You see, ladies and gentlemen, if the tragedy is that if that battle had been won, where they were going to corrupt the Bitcoin chain, the blockchain mechanism, to disadvantage the men and women on this planet, we would have never had a venue, or at least an avenue, out of being servituded to the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, and the rest of it. Have no mistake, you have understood and you have comprehended in every single way that essentially you are and are treated like a slave. Have no mistake about that, because the Canadians, and I will cover that as well, have found out and discovered that their level of contempt that the governments and the principalities, and I'll explain that later, how they've been treated, is nothing more than an open declaration to say that you are nothing more than subjects, which is another word for slave. We came very close, ladies and gentlemen, just a few years back, where the earth itself was going to be polluted to a point of no return, thereby locking men and women into slavery for oxygen, food, water, energy, and all essential services. Because that battle has now been successfully won for the restoration, as it were, so the crown can return back to you, the corona that is, we have a beautiful avenue to move into, because you know and I know the banks are failing, just as the central governments are failing. So, comprehend the full length and breadth of what I am saying in terms of this block size wars that were there essentially to rob you of your ability to keep your own store of value as yours, or even take it to your grave, because that's your right of way. Full stop. I'm going to explain to you now something so pernicious that once you wrap your mind around it, your thinking as a slave, and unfortunately your thinking at the moment is very self-defeatist and very protesting about your slave masters. In fact, you have more power than you can imagine, and I'm going to give you as much of that as I possibly can today, now. You see, you know from George Orwell's Animal Farm that the animals, which are essentially the livestock, which is us, the livestock got together, the horses, the different species on the farm, as it were, got together, and they realized that the reason why they're coming together is because the total and utter tyranny of the farmer is that they cannot live by these methods and these, wanting for a better word, they cannot live under tyranny. And it's a beautiful work, but here's the catch, which you may not fully understand, and where I am almost failing with words to explain to you. And it is a failing on my part, have no mistake about that. You see, when they got together with all of those species, and they drew up a constitution just like what the Canadians thought that they have drawn up, or what the Americans thought that they had drawn up, or what the Australians thought that they had drawn up. Reality, when such a document was drawn up, it is instantly open to corruption, just as the block size wars. Okay, but block size wars won out, and I'm going to give you the solution out of that servitude. In doing so, another species called the pigs, characteristics of course of greed and manipulation, although the animal itself of course is totally and utterly got nothing to do with it, but it is the characterization of it, the personification of it in human characteristics. They get together and they add what is known as an amendment, just like they tried to make an amendment to the integrity of the blockchain itself with the block size wars. And that amendment, that compromise, without the presence of all the other people or parties that were involved in the original drawing up of the contract, that constitution that governed all the animals and removed the farmer, as it were, as the tyrannical thing that terrorized the animals, which is essentially us. They put in an amendment. If it does not have the consent of the other animals, which is us, then it's a non-void document. This is what the US done, called an amendment. In that amendment, it starts off the total and absolute corruption of what I am trying to reveal, in almost failing for finding better words for what I know. That is to say, some animals are more equal than other animals. Full stop. Now listen to the full analysis of what I'm showing you to be the most pernicious thing that Orwell demonstrated and also walked you into. You see, these people were never, ever your friends, just like Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, J.F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, etc. They never were your friends. They were pernicious characters. In doing so, in that constitution, that amendment that some animals are more equal than others, it set in place a motion of events within the other animals, which is us, to say they now have to work very, very hard, do their very best to show that they themselves, due to this amendment, are more equal than the other animals in order to attain to the level of that of the pig. So, what is the analysis here? You see, they got the horse, which is the most passive. Strength normally is very, very passive. That is why you find beggars will quite often ask very strong and powerful looking men for money, because generosity normally comes from very strong people. You can draw your own conclusions from it. But in doing so, as I'm trying to describe, in doing so, what they got to do is essentially the horse, and as the other animals, have to work against each other to show that they are more equal than the chicken or the duck or the other species, in order to fulfill its agreement in the amendment. You understand? It is one of the most pernicious and disgusting ways in which to create a conflict in a group of animals, people that have come together to show that we're all equal in the things pertaining to, like happiness, right of way, to be able to speak and spoken to and addressed with decency and respect, as the Americans will say, life and liberty. That analysis which I have given you is seldomly found, especially with these, and I almost beg your pardon in using this word, because I don't have a better word for it, with these scholastic masturbators, these academic scholastic masturbators that have little or no explanatory reach, hence preaching about Nietzsche. So I'll come back on point. One of the one of the tools that was used in this blockchain block size wars is identical in every way, in every format, as the tale of George Orwell's. Some animals are more equal than others. And there they put a full stop to it. But your ability as a man or a woman is to follow what has just been said to you to its most logical conclusion. And there you will see right before your eyes the means by which to destroy the Constitution, the means by which to destroy these animals, these men, these women, these people coming together by just making that amendment. Because when you compete with each other, you're essentially pulling away each other's energy in order to get on top of each other. This is why creative people do not compete. I do not compete with anybody, but a lot of people want to compete with me. You see, because they lack creativity, and it is the same identical lack of creativity that wants to constantly corrupt, because on the back of that corruption of the block size wars and on the corruption of George Orwell's 1984 or even Animal Farm, is that the end result is it will cause internal conflict by having that amendment. And hence the word amendment essentially means no mend thinking. That's passe. M-E-N-T means to think, like mint. And A means no, and the root word means man. Okay? Mend, man. So mend is what men do. It essentially means no mend thinking. And these things enter your subconscious mind, which is an entirely different subject, which I have addressed already. I am hoping that I have put the first element of what I am saying to rest. But I will give it a couple of more sentences. We came very, very close, and I am shocked how close it was to losing out on the blockchain, because somebody came along, pernicious characters, and just simply wanted to put in this block size wars an amendment that some blockchains are more equal than others, that some Bitcoin holders and the coins themselves in digital format are more equal in the hands of others. You understand the full length and breadth of what I am saying to you. This is why I'm 100% in Bitcoin. Okay? Not even gold and silver, which I am going to cover later on this presentation. Full stop. I'm now going to go on to the second element of it. And I want you to understand and comprehend the tragedy and the mechanism, the means of which to blind people. How to blind your children, rob them of their senses. If you teach your children to only see in black and white, irrespective of when the baby is born, whether it sees in color or not, and it does take time for it to develop in color, it's not born with it. His eyes have yet to adjust, or her eyes are yet to adjust to color, as well as focal lengths. You folks know that. If you teach your babies from the point of birth, or even at age of 7, to only see black and white by telling them that is black and not red, by telling them, no, that's not grey, but that's black, by telling them, no, that's not yellow, but that is white, when you create that two-dimensional way of seeing things, black and white, quite literally, visually, eventually within about 90 days, and this has all been proven, as disgusting as it is, your baby will grow up for the rest of its life until it discovers something better, only to be able to see black and white. In other words, a perfectly normal baby that has been totally and utterly educated, even in the most loving, understanding fashion, or even in the most brutal way, when you teach it only to see black and white, and to convince it that all other colors are nothing more than black and white, that is all the baby will now begin to see right through adulthood, until it encounters a paradigm shift. You are now cognizant of what I am saying to you. And it is exactly the same way in psychology. When you teach the child that phantoms really do exist, like ghosts, spirits that can haunt you, that can take possession of you, and these shadows, like the boogeyman, and these good phantoms, as it were, like Father Christmas, or the Witch of the North, or whatever it is, now enters the psychological makeup, the cognitive works of the brain, and they now begin to understand that phantoms can be so real that the possibility of such a thing existing is so frightening that it is better for that baby or child to do what it's told rather than suffer the unknown consequences of a phantom coming real. You see, as innocent as you are as parents, as innocent as you are, when you taught your children and your babies, even right up to the age of 14 and 18, that these phantoms are for real and these ghosts and eddies are for real, what choice, just like the little baby that was born fully able to see color, convinced that there is only a world of black and white. It is an identical process for getting babies to see only black and white, just as it is to brainwash babies, children, or even adults to believing that phantoms are real, and hence the fear of the unknown, and the fear of poverty, the fear of death might turn into a phantom. I might be grabbed by creatures from the afterlife and taken somewhere else. These phantoms become so real that they turn to extremely pernicious organizations calling itself the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, or any one of these so-called religions, including the synagogues, including the mosques. All of it revolves around you effectively teaching your children that there is hell and that there is heaven, teaching your children to see in 2 dimensions of black and white. That is factual. So much so that when you have successfully robbed them of the full spectrum of light that falls on this earth, they are already convinced that the earth itself holds terrors that they can't deal with because they're phantoms. Hence they are mostly fighting phantoms, preparing themselves for an afterlife, and hence tragically buying themselves death pledges and mortgages, going to intermediaries, what they call the middleman, in order to govern themselves. So let me see if I can explain this to you in a slightly different paraphrasing. Let me see if I can paraphrase this. And all of these things will all become very relevant as I expose more and more of the bureaucratic mechanism of what the Lord spiritual and temporal is, what the sheriffs do, what the coroners do. I'll cover all of this here, all of it. You see, when we are born, to give you the psychological, neurological network that goes with this explanation, see, when we are born, our eyesight actually sees what's coming in. So, as you are looking at me, when you are born, the true image on the back of your head, as it were, is actually upside down, because the top end goes to the bottom bit, and the bottom bit goes to the top end. So you see this pen like that, but in reality, as the light falls, the pen should be like this. And within this, there's more explanation than I can possibly give you now, but that's what it is. What your mind does is it now, using its CPU, central processing center, begins to reverse that image only by neurological network, by neurological methods. But the image itself, as it falls, just as it does on a camera, an old traditional camera, it is still upside down. The process of making it like this, as you would see, as it is in reality, as it were, is once again psychological. It's just like getting children to see only black and white, even though the full colors are there. What they're doing is that they are discriminating not to see those other colors. They become invisible. So this process of your mind actually reversing the image as it falls on the back of your head to reverse it back as it would be in nature is purely a psychological element. And within that psychological element, because it has that facility, that capacity, pernicious characters are able to come along and create phantoms of it. Because your brain already has the ability to twist those things that already fall on the back of your head. Because it's able to do that, the pernicious characters were able to find ways to put phantoms into your mind, to be able for you only to see a limited number of things and possibilities in life. You see, how many people cannot think their way out of a banking centralized system, even though it exists in blockchain? How many people cannot think and work their way out of a centralized government, calling itself Canadian government, UK government, or whatever it is? How many people are unable to visualize and work that in their minds, even though such a thing exists, and that's called a bureaucracy. How many people are unable to see anything outside of a corporate world, like a corporate governance, even though such a thing exists, called cooperatives? How many people are unable to think and feel that their faith with their Creator requires no middleman, no vicar, no pope, no nothing, no's, in order to commune with your Creator on a geometric level playing field? How many men and women out there always feel disadvantaged, put upon, raped, pillaged, imprisoned, lied to? How many? These are all evidence of how successful these pernicious people were in twisting and limiting your field of vision, your experiences, and most importantly, to understand your world has 1,000,000,001 possibilities. To the point they've reduced it to either a possibility of this bank, centralized, to another high street bank, centralized, giving you the illusion that that one bank and the high street is vastly different from the other, or because it has a different color on it and a different emblem. You see, ladies and gentlemen, the objective here, just like with the block size wars, and just like with the perspective of only being able to see in black and white, by you telling your children there is only black and white, is that it puts the pernicious people in control to be able to disadvantage you so much they can now take full advantage in realizing in George Orwell's, in that famous book, the author of which I've forgotten, H.G. Wells, in the kingdom of the blind, the man with one eye is the king. Think about it. In the kingdom of the blind, the man with one eye is the king. We call this the one-eye monster. It's very famous in mythology. But essentially, the people that have locked you down and falsely taught you wrong ways of counting, of reading, writing, of being able to see possibilities, is the same identical people that have corrupted your world to the point where even the peaceful Canadians have now had enough. And that's ricocheting all over the world. Full stop. I will now come to the third. And the third in reality should have been the first, because that is the most important that you folks need to listen to. And in many senses, because there is no order of importance in this, because my panoramic vision, as it were, my ability to be able to see 360 degrees all round me in a spherical nature almost, to the point to be able to break the present human understanding, albeit break the sphere of present human understanding in as many categories as I possibly can, is what I've always aimed to achieve. Hence I have no competitors. Just like with David Wayne Miller, he had no competitors. And there are thousands of people on this planet that are so creative, they got no competitors. That's called unique. And I will also describe to you how to touch that uniqueness by pure science alone. In other words, you can follow it to its logical conclusion without no corruption in it. It'll make perfect sense. You have globally, ladies and gentlemen, what is known as a chieftain. And these chieftains, under fiefdom, it's called fiefdom, they're commonly called chief commoners. Chief commoners as in common law. Please do not, let me pause, it's too negative. For those people that think they know common law, the best way and the most diplomatic that I can explain myself is, please shut up, listen, or leave. Because you don't know anything about common law. You just presume and assume. The chief commoner controls all minerals in his own district or province, whether that's continental or just regional, what they call councils and parishes. They're all run by chieftains. And if you haven't understood it, let me explain to you again. They control and own and have laid claim to all minerals that's within their jurisdiction. So if I am the chieftain and I live in a place called Forest Gate in East London, I should say that's my dwelling. And if I was the chief commoner there, I would own everything on the surface as well as the air on top, which is called a ceiling. That's what they call it, ceiling. So essentially, from the atmosphere above, so if the Earth is like this, and the myosphere is like that, I essentially will own in a V shape right to where the Earth is. And as the Earth goes this way, I will now own everything to the core. Okay, so it'll be like this. So that will be the surface of the Earth. This would be the atmosphere. And that would be the core of the Earth. I essentially own everything in it. What lives on top, what lives above, called airways, okay, air control, and as well as all the minerals, the water, as well as the people, the livestock, the wild animals, the trees, I own it all. You understand what I'm saying to you? That is what a chief commoner is. And you can look it up. And I will share some slides here for you to understand that. These chief commoners, ladies and gentlemen, are fiefdoms. Like, for example, in Africa, that fiefdom is called, one of them is called Mugabe. You can look at him in one of the documents called Committee of 300, where all of these chieftains are friends with each other. Okay? Full stop. Hopefully I've made you understand that essentially these people are what they call lords. Lord means landowner, owner of cattle and chattel, which is essentially you and the housing. Everybody understands this. This is called feudal system, and in India they call it, I think, a caste system. In Africa they also have a name for it. Every country in the world actually has it. Now, these chieftains, a very long time ago, all came together and made a contract. And I've done a video on that. Okay? That's about 2-3 years old. And because of this, because of their position that are so powerful, they were able to disguise themselves so you don't understand how the chieftain works or the bureaucratic mechanism works. And in doing so, typically, for example, let us say in the Americas, the so-called Red Indian chiefs are portrayed as being victims of the United States and the settlers. That's how it's portrayed. And that these chieftains are essentially like savages, not at all worth making treaty with, or making contract with, or communing with, or creating a council which I'm going to also explain to you. Because the images that you have in your mind, that these redskins, as it were nothing more than people with feathers in their head, eagle feathers, as it were, and that they wore, as part of their coquette or coquetry, the brilliance of a male bird in nature, like the like the eagle, like having the prowess of like a mountain cat, taking on the personas, as it were, of these animals. They portray it to you that these men and women are essentially nothing more than just silly people with feathers in their head, which would be the correct statement, because that's stupidity. Do you really think you can put feathers in your head and make head dressings from it and wear the skin of an animal and think that you have the prowess of that animal and the strength of it and that you have the foresight of it? However much symbolic these languages may be, you are not that by just simply putting it on. Men are men, eagles are eagles, tigers are tigers. If you cross it, you're basically leaving the position of a man, which is more powerful than a chieftain. In doing so, they got the American people, as well as their own kind, as it were, their own tribesmen, their own counselors, that somehow that the Europeans treated them so awfully that they have no control. That the chieftains are victims of the European settlers, even though the Russians, the Chinese, the Icelandics, the Indians out of India were there all the time, including Africans, including the people from the so-called West Indies. They were all there. See, in doing so, what they've successfully done is to brainwash you into thinking these chieftains don't have any power. But in reality, those Indians that are portrayed as wearing feathers are the ones that sold you out. Just as the African people are now beginning to understand their chieftains are their enemies. They're the ones that sold them out. To who? Who do they sell it out to? They say it's the British. Let me make it very clear. What the British is these chieftains. The whites, as you say, as you see, as it were, are just playing the administrative role for the Africans, the American Indian chieftains, the Indians out of India, and the rest of it. That's how they got you to believe that they are innocent victims of the British Empire. They lied to you. That is only one element of what I still need to describe to you, which is going to get more and more pernicious as I go along. You see, if the chieftain and the general public understood the process of what I'm talking about, the people will rebel and just simply hang the chieftain, or set him on fire, or drown him in a lake, or her, whoever they are. So what they do is they set up what is known as city-states. And I'm going to show you, and I'm going to tell you that I've broken the code on it, to the point where I'm going to name and shame them for what they are. That's how powerful this is. That's why it's critical knowledge. But you have to stay with me with the logic. You have to stay with me following it to its logical conclusion. Essentially, ladies and gentlemen, the chieftain, just like a farmer, works on rotation, crop rotation. You know about crop rotation, that the land has to stay still for a year or so, and then it can be worked again. Otherwise, you will overtax it. They call this crop rotation. The crop rotation of removing people's energy and depleting the soil and the trees and etc. are also done on a rotation basis called a 99-year lease. A 99-year feudal lease. That feudal lease, ladies and gentlemen, allows them to remove your sweat equity. We are now in that era. We are now in that era. That allows that 99-year time, that's what he needs. That's what the chieftain needs to be able to remove the entire sweat energy, the entire commercial energy of you, the people, into his treasury. In England, that's called the Church of England. Church quite literally means Lord. So when you go to church and you pray on a Sunday, Lord, you are actually praying to one of the Lords of England, as in Lord's House of Lords. And I'll tell you that mechanism, because Church of England quite literally means Lord of England. Let me say it again. Church of England means, church means Lord. When you pray, you're praying to the Lord of England. That's how powerful this explanatory reach is. In order for that chieftain to now get you to voluntarily give up that energy, and so he can put it into his coffers, because when you remove energy from people, you're essentially removing their life and putting life into you. Just like a vampire gets to live that extra night by sucking on its victims, by drinking the life energy, which is the blood, as it were, into itself. You understand? It takes a life, it takes an entire life for it to sustain itself for one day. Because this is how much energy that the vampire and the chieftain is expanding. They require a great deal of energy to keep themselves alive and going just for that day. Essentially, they require how many ever days there are in a year to sustain themselves for 1 year. And if they've got an empire, then they need millions and billions. The Federal Reserve Bank was set up by these chieftains in their private capacity to issue notes that allows them to take greater and greater percentages of your life from you and into their coffers, called the treasury. So if this pen or a coin is representative of a year's work of you, if somebody steals that pen, you've lost your whole life, because you've worked for your whole life. Your time is your life. That's what the Federal Reserve does, and that's what the Bank of England does. What is the Bank of England? It is the Bank of the Lord of England. The Bank of England is another way of saying the Church of England. There's more. There's 1,000 times more. Now, you know, and I know, there's going to be a lot of resistance. There's going to be a lot of resistance from the people if they find out that's what the chieftain is up to. So what they do is that they disguise it with this city-state. So I'll come back to the city-state. The city-state of London, the City of London, is one example I'm going to use. One example. There are many others. The chieftain the chieftain of the City of London now knows that he has given out enough fraudulent documents and fraudulent notes called money, and created so many death pledges called mortgages, and that he's essentially put his people, as it were, into total and utter servitude to the instruments of paper, which are the bank notes, which are the mortgage notes, which are the loan agreements, which are the credit cards, and so on and so forth. He's put so much out there now that if you don't pay it back under the threat of violence, he will take it from you by force, which is the job of the sheriffs, the constables, and the fiction courts, who are rapists. And I say that emotionally because I want to tell you, you judges that wear that black robe, I'm coming for you. I am coming for you. So, when he's ready, when that lease runs out, just like crop rotation, it is time for him to pull it in. And they do that. And remember, it is the mortgages, the land, the farmlands, the houses, the cars, the parking tickets, the speeding fines, the false charges, the prisons. All of this is controlled by the chieftain. All of it. When they are ready now, what they will do, this is the trick I'm going to explain. And I need time with it, okay? I need time with it because I have not even verbalized this with my own judges. I haven't even had time to explain it to them how that works, even though most of them kind of figured it out. Let us look at the England system. The City of London, they say, is a city-state. It's a city-state that is independent of the other countries or other landmass, as it were. So that tiny square mile, as it were, essentially is independent from the rest. The rest of what? If you look up the City of London, it will tell you that it's in England. It's in England. You understand? It pertains to the laws of England. But they call themselves an independent state, like the Vatican. There's a trick there. I'll explain much more with more explanatory depth than anybody that I have ever encountered on the internet. This is not because I'm so clever. It's because that is much control these people exert over you by creating misinformation. So in England, as it were, you have two houses. You have an upper house and a lower house. Let's forget about that. Let's just look at Parliament, whether it's up or lower, or an other element called the House of Lords. The House of Lords, which means another word for saying house of church. Churches. It's the House of Churches. That Lords, ladies and gentlemen, essentially gives orders to Parliament, what they call the House of Commons, to convince the common people, which are subjects of the commoner, called slaves, that's what a subject is, to be able to talk in such a way as to rob them of the ability to control their own minerals. That is, the minerals of you. That's why they talk them into saying there's a waterage supply and therefore there's a shortage in waterage supply, drinking water, so we need to now take that water from the sewage, which is another word for the defecation and the urination that you do. They're going to pump it back in and serve it to you as drinking water by putting some, I've forgotten the chemical, aluminium sulfate, I think it is, that causes the water to become crystal clear, even though it's shitty water. This is just one example. That's the job of Parliament, to parley. The Lords, ladies and gentlemen, are essentially the men and women that control the individual parts of whole of England as you see it on the map. You understand that? But if the people figure that out, they'll think, hey, that means I'm a servant of that Lord. They'll figure it out. So what they do is they create another layer of fraud. What they will do in open sight, every time a parliamentarian called a MP must not ever look at a Lord. They must lower their head to a Lord, even though they say the Lords is the lower chamber and that the Parliament is the higher chamber. So if you out there bow to me and are not allowed to look me in the eye, what does that mean? That you are not on a level playing field with me, that I am above you. You understand? Now that the Lords give them the instructions through their whips to tell Parliament what to say, and Parliaments are servants of the Lord and not of the people, they convince you need to go to a third party. So in doing so, those Lords sit there also very innocently, and you so innocently pray to these Lords every Sunday, just as you do every Friday in your mosques, just as you do Friday in your synagogues, just as you do on a Saturday in your temples. In your temples. They're identical. So the question is, how have they figured out? How are they getting the energy out of you? Well, what happens is this. In the shield of City of London, the emblem in Latin says, O Lord, direct us. The City of London chieftain shield is saying, Lords, out of Lord spiritual and temporal, outside of that zone called Westminster, the zone outside is the City of London, they're basically saying, direct us, when they are deliberately telling you the opposite by saying we are independent of any other countries, or independent of Parliament, and so on and so forth. They get you to pretend that Parliament works for them as well, and the Lords. No. You see, the Lords, in their private capacity, tell the chieftain, do this now, just as they do with the parliaments. And in doing so, these Lords look like they're outsiders, that they are innocent, just innocent, peer positions to keep integrity of Parliament. And now comes the crunch. These Lords and spiritual, which is called Archbishop of Canterbury, out of the Anglican Church. Anglican means contract, that's an angle. Okay, land of angles, four-corner rule. Okay, that's a four-corner rule, it's a contract. What they do, he himself being a lord, as it were, all in fiction, now tells the City of London that that Lord now tells their figurehead called Elizabeth II. Yeah, that's why she says, my lords. She's quite literally saying, my lords, my owners, I'm the servant of you. What's your wishes? They will now, this is for real, because these lords are also the Commonwealth, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and so on and so forth. They have a hands in. They're going to, on the Platinum Jubilee, through this mechanism, they're going to suck out the entire life force of the Canadians, the US, Australia, New Zealand, and so on and so forth, and bring it into their coffers, which is called the Bank of England. Bank of England means Lord Church of England. And in doing so, by doing that, they do that through the courts. They suck quite literally all the life force, all the work, sweat, equity, the monies, all back into their coffers. And here's the thing. The chief commoner controls all minerals. That includes gold, that includes silver, platinum, that includes all the other franchise banks, that includes the farm, the produce, that includes you as well. Not me. Not also the 91,000 subscribers that are now privy to that, as well as my Tricks and Traps university students. She will now instruct the courts to suck up that entire system of money lending, of that fraudulent notes, fraudulent documents, back into their coffers. And she, in a ceremony, the City of London mayor, which is a totally different mayor from the London mayor, Mayor of London, will now invite the Queen, Elizabeth II, which is essentially the figurehead for the Lords spiritual and temporal, to bring in the notes. She will actually carry with her the entire life energy. Sorry, I beg your pardon, not the entire, but a huge percentage of that life energy of the Commonwealth into the City of in London by special visitation. The City of London will give an invitation. She will make an appearance. Essentially, she will take those notes, that entire trillions upon trillions upon trillions of life energy, crossing over the so-called boundary of into City of London, where she will hand it over to the other mayor, because one mayor is on a level playing field to another mayor. Another lord is on another level playing field to another lord. But a lord that is not a lord cannot look eyes upon another lord. That is why the parliamentarians have to lower their heads. The Queen is not a lord. That's why she lowers her head. And that's called the crown. So she will take the entire crown, the corona energy, and hand it over by visitation, called the mayoral ceremony, where the City of London mayor will invite Elizabeth II to hand it over, with also the City of London mayor and the London mayor. And then they will cross that boundary, called, what they call boundary line, like from the US to Canada. They'll cross that. Just Washington, D.C. has the same thing. And she will hand it over, where the chieftain will now put that into the Bank of England. That Bank of England will now transmit that energy to the Lord's spiritual full stop. The Lord, the House of Lords, are your slave master by name. Look them up and you'll find their names. write to them now. You bloody well stop and correct them. You stop them and correct them, because slave trading is punishable by hanging in any country in the world. You understand, lords, what I have done to you today? You understand what I am doing to you, and understand you will. In doing so, ladies and gentlemen, you look them directly in the eye for what they are. They stand beneath you because they are a legal fiction. Do you understand? Do you comprehend, you lovely people out there? You fantastic people that I think so much of, that I give so much of my energy and my knowledge to you, so you can make full use of it. You must make sure that this lords, through trickery, through foul means, do not remove your life force from you. I know it is challenging to understand and comprehend that virtually all the sheriffs, they have their own sheriffs, all work for these lords, that every single administrative government, corporate governance, all work for these lords. If you require more words to the bureaucratic mechanism, what I have just said, which is one of the most iconoclastic things that I can explain to you in terms of cracking their bureaucratic process. If you need more, go into an emotional level, but in a controlled way. In your innocence, you go to church, but you did not know a church meant Lord. You thought it was Lord Jesus, out of your innocence. But a Lord quite literally means a Lord. It's a legal fiction. That's what a church is. It's a legal fiction. That's why every Church of England has no crosses outside of it. Those symbols that you see, they're fortifications where arrows used to be shot out of if needed to be protected by invading forces. The Church of England has always been the banks of the provinces of those areas. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? This is how pernicious they are. This is how effective they are to get you to pray to them. You are essentially praying to those witless buffoons in the House of Lords. This includes the Canadians, the Americans, and the rest of it. I am not sure if I have successfully explained to you that bureaucratic mechanism and how that works. I am hoping that I have. If I have, please tell me on the comment section if I have or not. Yeah, write it out in the comment section, because I can't exactly read what's being said in the chat box, as it were. Without that feedback, it's quite challenging for me to explain it to people. Because these things I work with as a Chief Federal Postal Court judge. I work with it all the time. So in my head, I know it inside out. But verbalizing it, I seldomly ever have. So the words do not come out, as it were, as it should do, so fluently. I think that's only the third element, out of the 13 things you need to know. I will end that topic, as it were, now, and I'll move on to the great phobias. You see, in the timelines of chronology, of Doctor Who, because that's what that is, or Time Machine. All that is about chronos. It's about time. The timelines, like the 3-day timeline, what they call Resistance Act. Jesus rose on the third day. You guys know the mythology behind that. Well, not mythological facts, as it were, because the light of man. Actually, I'm not going to go there. I do apologize. I'll come back to it. Come back to the topic. You see, in your mind, you have phobias. And these phobias are there to traumatize you out so you don't ever understand it or want to work with it. One of the most powerful timelines and numbers that you can have and be in possession of is called, like for example, the 3-day rescissions. What that means, you can turn down any contract in 3 days on offer. Like a marriage can be nullified within 3 days with no other consequences. If you bought an aeroplane, you get a 3-day resting period, and you can change your mind within that 3 day. Now, how powerful is that 3 day in your comprehension, in your court of record to know and work with? Very powerful, isn't it? So what are the mechanisms that they will do and create to move you out of that understanding or even touching, or being so frightened of touching that 3 days? Your ability to refuse a contract. How powerful is that? Well, it's very powerful. So they might come up with traumatizing events like the 3 Stygian witches, which is our symbolic representation of your ability, since time-honored means, to refuse a contract. Beautifully narrated in the Gospels, as it were, because Jesus decided not to die when he was crucified and brought himself back to life. You see, every coroner knows, especially in the colder climates, that what was pronounced dead can come back to life within 3 days. That's why the body is not contaminated or broken or wounded in any manner, but left to stay for 3 days just in case the man or woman decides to change their mind. People can be in comas for 3 days with such levels of shallow breathing, or breathing sort of like 5 or 6 times a minute, that the coroner will miss it. These are all factual. World War II soldiers were buried alive, knowing full well that a vast number of them are just in trauma, comatized from the trauma, which is a natural defense of the body, that they come back only to find that they've been buried alive. These are all factual. When they dig them up later stage and they say, what are these fingernails? They're saying, oh, it's just a reflex. Yes, if rigor mortis hasn't set in, they will move about. There will be reflexes. But for them to scratch and scratch till their fingers bleed in the coffins. You see, freaks like Kissinger knew this, and people worship him as a hero. But that, I'm going off subject again. So that's a very powerful knowledge, isn't it? Your ability to turn down a contract within 3 days. That includes the prison. They call that the 72-hour rule. So they create traumatic events, like, for example, the 3 Stygian witches. Whoever would want to go anywhere near the 3 ugly Stygian witches, who would suck out and eat and cannibalize you? You see, they're building up a trauma, so you'll move away from telling the lords or the courts to go screw themselves. Another very powerful tool, a number in your arsenal, is the number 13. You see, Jesus' disciples were 12. There were also the 12 constellations, and Jesus being the fiduciary, the 13th. 13th is also what makes a council. A council has full dictatorial powers over all corporate governances. Once it's put on paper, the governances, the corporate governances, whether it's Canada, United Kingdom, United States, will go and do the wishes of the council. To bring everybody, all 13 people, which is essentially the 12 qualities of men and women, like the 12 tribes of Israel, coming on a level playing field under a round table or a square table, which is another word for a contract, four-corner rule. And when they come together and agree upon something, just like Animal Farm, they've created something very powerful. And if you let that serpent in, it'll put an amendment to it and try to get the council to cannibalize itself. So what lengths would these people, these lords that commissioned the makings of the movies, go to rob you of your ability to come together and draw up your own constitution, called a council? It's a very powerful tool, isn't it? Your entire mythology revolves around the 12 constellations. Virtually every culture on the planet has it. India, US, Africa, China, and of course, Europe, as well as the Middle East, Mediterranean. They're all 12, 12, 12. And the 13th, of course, being the one that brings them together. How powerful is that, knowing that? How many founding fathers were there in the United States of America? 13. How many stars are there on your flag? On your notes, on your shields? 13. How many feathers are there? 13. 13, 13, 13, 13. So what lengths would they go to? Well, when you go into a hotel room, they'll say, we don't have number 13 because it's bad luck. So you're brainwashed from the beginning, even on a subliminal level. There's no room number 13. There's no floor level number 13, because it's bad luck. Why is it bad luck? When number 13 can create an entire council, and Jesus or Christ had 13. What other things would they do? They might say, well, it's Friday the 13th, and that's a very bad number. It's bad luck, especially in Christianity. They shun upon it. Because power comes with that 13. It's your ability to control the best in the various species of men and women, psychological types. The strengths of the constellations is what you're able to bring in under a fiduciary with the 13. They might create horrific movies, horror movies, called the Friday the 13th, to traumatize you to never, ever think or even want to become or form anything of a 13th. You see, ladies and gentlemen, when you move into your psychology and question through logic and rationality, why? It soon avails itself that there are self-interest groups that would attack Bitcoin, that would attack and steal your money, your life force, your energy, your children, take out organs from your body. Yes, they have permission through all powers of attorney to take out your organs. By the way, you can only organ harvest while you're still alive. You understand what I've said to you? You cannot organ harvest from a dead person, or sorry, a dead man or a woman. The heart still needs to be pumping blood. There has to be activity. In other words, life. The chief commoner, through the House of Lords, through Elizabeth II, through the mayoral ceremony, control even the harvesting of your organs. We all know about the 13 tribes of Israel and one lost tribe, which is very symbolic to say they've lost the fiduciary system, or mankind has lost the fiduciary system, which is the system of trust. The blockchain system was able to overcome that by making it a trustless system, where everything is so plain and open, you bypass the trusted party. You see, in psychology, ladies and gentlemen, this is within your genetic code, which I will also talk about. Within those numbers is man's solutions. This is why there is so much activity, called acting, to traumatize you away from ever touching these numbers. And I'm revealing it and educating you as a gift for the Corona period. You have in genes, as it were, another number called 500. When you have 500, you essentially have a gene pool. The gene pool is able to create diversification of men and women. So it keeps a healthy set of genes. That 500, ladies and gentlemen, that integral part of society, 500, to keep authenticity and integrity of a gene pool, is identical of the number of people you need to vote or elect into power, bypassing all the other pathetic governances that you have, prime ministers, presidents. You can quite literally elect yours. So, here's a challenge for you. What lengths have they gone to hide that from you? Well, 99% of you don't even know anything about it. That's how effective it is. I recently had a letter or email from YouTube saying that we've taken one of your videos down because it goes against local authorities' opinions on what corona is and etc., as well as the World Health Organization, and they took the video down. They're saying it broke community guidelines. Well, my subscribers, 91,000 of yous, are this community. Which one of yous, or which 91,000 of yous, said I've broken community guidelines? Did you say that? No. So who did? It must have been the other billions of people that watch YouTube. Did they vote this in? Did they elect this in? That I broke community guidelines? No. So what will happen if 500 of yous leave a comment, or 500 and more leave a comment saying that Mark Kishon Christopher has broke no guidelines, put his video up, and I now take that and send it to YouTube as my terms and conditions, and let's see what happens. Because in order to elect a person into power, a man or a woman, you only need a minimum of 500. If you want to run for election in your local council, you have to put a deposit down. If you get more than 500, they give you your deposit back. You see, these are very powerful numbers. And these numbers mean everything. I hopefully have communicated to you the power of the 13 and the power of the 3 and the level of pernicious attacks on your psyche is taking place, and then on your children as well, to walk you and talk you out of it. My wish is that I have done that. I'm now going to speak to you about the county coroner. As I educated the Canadians about the county coroner, is the one that controls your corona, and they either have you listed as the living or the dead. And for example, making it very, very simplistic, if you have a mortgage, if you're in debt, if you don't respond to logic, if you've taken drugs, if you're a drug addict, if you have committed crimes against man, they list you as the dead. And a bureaucratic system is put in place to keep the dead as the dead through the county coroner's court. Through the county coroner's court. They keep a record of it. Like, for example, you fed somebody, and that person or man or woman, whoever it is, bit the hand that fed them, and the county coroner, through the monitoring of the IP addresses, finds that you have done that because it's all automated. They list you as the dead, and a bureaucratic system is put in place where you now go to courts where they wear the black robe, honoring the dead, which is essentially you. Yes, of course, the vast, let me rephrase it. You see, every Christian, every Jew, every Muslim, every Hindu, whatever it is, Catholic, knows in their heart that they cannot have a mortgage. But if you want a mortgage and you cannot step up to it by getting rid of that mortgage, then what is it that you are saying openly to these people, to the Lords, the House of Lords, to the Church of England, that you would prefer to have an instrument of death and take your undertakings? This is what the courts tell you. Yeah, they tell you, go and do some undertaking. I undertake you to do this and do that, which is the language of funeral directors. You see, the county coroner's court, and as hard as it is to believe, because it's so absurd to think that you walking around with blood and etc. is listed as the dead. You see, the listing of brain dead also makes reference to how can they have a mortgage and still claim to be living? How can they give consent for them to have a mortgage and still be living? When they are confronted with such obvious oxymorons, what's an oxymoron? Oxymoron is something that makes you moronic. When they're confronted with this, they're basically saying that you have had a lobotomy. You are brain dead. This includes drug addiction. Have no mistake. LSD, all these type of drugs, they're actually chemical lobotomies. Yeah, they're chemical lobotomies. The Americans know that if they've done criminality, Washington, D.C. actually lists them as a slave. You guys already know that. You can look it up and you can find out more about it by just studying it. Ladies and gentlemen, another word, as you know, and I've explained to you before, another word for coroner, medical coroner, is corona. Another word for corona is the crown. The crown that Elizabeth II thinks that she can transmit as a utility, as a transmitting utility into the hands of the mayor of City of London, to put it into their Bank of England. Bank of England is just another way of saying Church of England. Another way of saying Church of England is just another way of saying Lord of England, which are the Lord spiritual and temporal. The spiritual element of which is the Archbishop of Canterbury. Oh boy, is he going to have problems with me. Who removes your spiritual energy. That is your ability to make wishes, which I will cover later on. It's part of your genetic code. It's part of you being genuine, which I will cover later on this presentation of how the actual mechanism works. Archbishop of Canterbury, if you think the Lords have got problems with me, your problem has just started. I'm coming for you, boy. I think so little of you. Anyway, let us not go down that route at the moment. Let me do it and then teach the whole world how that's done. So you know the element of spiritual, which I will cover later. Now let's talk about the temporal. The Templar Bar is another way of saying Lord Spiritual and Temporal. Temporal is Parliament. It means something in your mind. The word temple, like a Hindu temple, Sikh temple, a temple, like the temple in your mind, this region called a temple, are all one and the same meaning. It means it's purely in your mind, nowhere else. Nowhere else. 3 elements, you see: Lords, spiritual, temporal. Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Executor, administrator, beneficiary. You think up more. The temporal element of it is to keep you in a temporal basis, like a time temporal. It's to lock you in a position of going round and round and round with 1,000,000,001 oxymorons. Omicron. Moronic. Is it moronic? Is it Omicron? Must be one of them. Which one it is will determine whether you're listed as the dead or as the living. You understand what I'm talking about. For those people that have bit the hand that has fed them, which is an allegory of a psychological type that would attack the very people that they have benefited from, are listed as humans. Also people that cannot agree upon things. They are, and by their own definitions, a human is a monster. You already know that. And a monster cannot ever inherit their own offspring, their blood, or their properties. 3 elements. They can never inherit their offspring, and they can never inherit their blood, and they can never inherit their property. These are the consequences of when I was so proud to once have had a mortgage, until I began to understand the horrors of what a mortgage is, and everything changed for me. I hope that I have made it very clear. Liars, cheaters, this includes the lords, the spiritual, the temporal, that have done ill upon the crown, including the city of London, including the people that have attacked the good men and women of Canadian, US, and all of it, have forfeited their corona. They have forfeited their life. They're now ready for extinction, and I will be helping them on their way. You see, ladies and gentlemen, you know the shield of City of London says, "O Lord, guide us, instruct us." You now know who they're speaking to. You understand? They also have a shield with the St. George's cross on it, which is behind me. I beg your pardon, behind me there. And on that shield, they have a sword pointing up. Okay, that means they're on guard and in combat mode. That sword, ladies and gentlemen, is a patron saint sword that severed the head of St. Paul's in the Gospel. Why would you have a sword that severed St. Paul's head? Why would you do that? You see, these are called symbolism. It's because St. Paul was the usurper, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, pretending to be something that he wasn't. And what the shield is doing is it's saying that we are ready to sever the head that pretends to be something it's not. Let me make it very clear. You've already had several visits from me already, and my head is still on my head, on my shoulders, as it were. The symbolisms that these people use, ladies and gentlemen, is the language of the subconscious mind. The images and the symbolism, the pictograph, the hieroglyphs, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, are the language of your subconscious mind. There are other languages that the subconscious mind understands, which unfortunately I do not have time to describe here. Have I also made it very clear, when you live a life of an oxymoron, when you have abused yourself with drugs, when you have met mortgages, when you actually believe that a God, which is essentially another word for something that sits slightly above a Lord, not the Creator, would actually believe you to cut off the end of a baby boy's penis and offer it as a sacrifice, if you actually believe this, you are brain dead. And the county coroner has you listed as dead. Think about it. What kind is it? What kind, as in mankind, as in this kind, that kind? What kind is it that would ask you to sever and mutilate creation itself and offer that as a compromise to killing your own son and offering it to a God? What kind of a God would say kill me your son, and Abraham would simply turn around and say, where do you want this killing done? In poetry. And then it turns around and says, well, I'm a loving God. Perhaps you shouldn't kill him, but just mutilate him in great agony and in great pain, and offer that pain and that blood sacrifice and that flesh sacrifice to me. You are listed as the dead. There is no animal on this planet that will ever allow any one of its offspring or children to be harmed by any other creature, including its own kind. There is no other animal, except one animal. It calls itself human. Men and women would simply hang you for even thinking of it. Hopefully, I have done my very best to explain to you how the county coroner's court works. And of course, I taught the Canadians, as I am willing to teach the Americans who are now mobilizing against Washington, D.C., as it were. I am happy to teach them how to break that on paper. And that's a free gift, but you have to come to me. Offer, acceptance, the exchange of value would be the time that you spend with me. And then I begin to perform, and then you begin to perform. Offer, acceptance, exchange of value, and performance, which is contract law. Next subject. As you know, Russia is in so-called conflict with the Ukraine. Most of Ukraine have asked Russia's help, except the one that is dictatorial, that calls itself democratic. As one or two of my students and the subscribers pointed out below, that America, for whatever it means in passe, is a republic and not a democracy. Those two words that man pointed out in the description box has more wisdom than most of your politicians do, or the protesters. America is not a democracy. A democracy is actually a hideous thing when you analyze it and understand it for its true word, value. That's why it was called a republic. In passe, republic means no public. No public essentially means it's not an actor. It's a negative expression, because everything that is outside of the public, outside of the private, is actually an actor. Everything in public is actually an actor. So in negativity, in negative language, in negative language, it means non-acting. Remember, public also is another word for acting. That's why all your politicians act like geniuses, or they spend their time looking like idiots, which they are all doing as part of a script that they are following from their private counterparts that control them. Look up the word acting and you will see it means subject to a master. Look it up. Russia, ladies and gentlemen, for its nation, has developed many technologies. One of them is the healing technologies of frequency devices, which are centuries old. These frequency devices have an incredibly high efficacy. Your normal medications have an efficacy of around about 5-6% or below. Some individual ones may have greater. but essentially the efficacy of something like 6% or even 10% is pathetic by its means. And besides that, the pharmaceutical are the makers of poisons and potions. The opposite of a potion is a wish, what we commonly call a curse. These technologies are only part of what is actually coming your way all over the world, including cooperatives. As I have pointed out to you, these healing devices to be able to reverse what the pharmaceutical industry has done to you is coming your way. And wars are being fought just like block-size wars to keep these technologies out of areas where the pharmaceutical industry believes it has invested so much in corruption that it wants to get its money back from the corruption that it's invested by corrupting your body, in other words, living off of your sickness, that it wants it back. That's why that's one of the wars that are being fought for the modalities, the healing modalities. These frequency devices are commonplace technologies in hospitals as first aid kits in Russia, but unheard of in the US, Canada, and in so many of these places. Here is a question that I wish to ask, which is out of the subject matter of what I'm speaking about. Do you know what a province means, Canadians? You guys live in provinces. Do you know what a province means? If you Canadians are listening to me, do you know what it means? Let me see if I can find it for you. I just want to go off subject for you, okay? Let me see if I can get it up. What does province mean? Simple question I asked. Okay? Listen carefully and you will understand why you are being treated with such extraordinary levels of contempt. You know your sheriffs are your enemies and that the police are your enemies. You know that, and you need to now know why. I will read it for you. My question is, simply, what does province mean? A principle, which is part of a principality. Administrative division of a country or empire. Or empire. What is the flag? What flies on your flag? The British Empire. Second, what does province mean? This is the second definition of province. See that? Okay. Second definition. British. This is how they define it. What flag flies on your flag, Canadians? Or used to? The whole of a country outside the capital, especially when regarded as lacking in sophistication or culture. I'll paraphrase it. I am the principalities that is defining you Canadians. You are unsophisticated bums and asses. And because of that, I will do with you as I please. And you are also part of my empire. In other words, you're my subjects. If that doesn't make you sick to the core, and if that doesn't cause you wanting to put handcuffs on the sheriffs, or any one of those people that have the audacity to even pick up a pepper spray in front of a man, you are duty-bound to put them under handcuffs. If you need to use my face and said, this man said you need to be in handcuffs, I will take the blame and I will deal with it. I put my mouth where my face is. I put my money where my mouth is. You guys understand what I'm saying? I am not a fake. The efficacies of these devices are so high They do exactly what they say. Who can argue with this? You see, the battle, just like blockchain and Ukraine, you've never heard about. But these are the devices that the US and the lords, the spiritual, are trying to stop from coming in. Putin has set up thousands of free ports all over the world. Free ports are economic, tax-free zones. What makes you poor? Taxes. And these free ports is what these vested interests are trying to stop. And it is not the Americans that are stopping it. It is not Germany or any of these countries. You are not aware of these self-interest groups. In fact, he's getting more aid from these countries, which you folks out there think are trying to stop him. No. As I said to you, the world is upside down, quite literally. You need to reorientate yourself using your central processing unit. In other words, get your brain cells working. Follow it to the logical conclusion. Any investigative journalist always follows the money. You know how to follow the money. Follow it. It doesn't take very much brain power. But if you're living with a mortgage, and if you're living with a God that asks for blood sacrifices, and if you're going to church in good faith, not knowing what a church means, then there is little or nothing that I can do. Next subject. In corporate law, ladies and gentlemen, your consent is agreed upon if you remain quiet. In corporate law. In fact, even in cooperatives. If you remain silent and you don't pick up the pen and paper and dictate your terms and conditions, you are consenting to the Canadians being treated the way that they are. You are consenting for the New Zealand native people for having their doors kicked in and forcibly vaccinated. Against what? I'm not quite sure. Obviously, they're corona. You see, when good men do nothing, you are consenting. You are saying that I'm perfectly okay with the Canadians being treated that way. I'm perfectly okay for the New Zealanders to be treated that way. I am perfectly okay with slave trading. I am perfectly okay with Lord Spiritual and Temporal removing the entire sweat equity of what they call the Commonwealth. This is why I had to take over the Crown copyright. I'm not consenting. I control it. I tell them what to do. Next subject. I've listed it as the number 8 of the 13 things that are critical for you to know. You may have to repeat this anything up to 2-3 times, 2-3 dozen times to yourself to comprehend the significance of what it is. And I have also shared it with you before. You know, the people in every nation is actually the creditor to the corporate world, the lords, the spiritual, and the temporal. The people are the creditors. They are the creditors to everything in the stock market. They are the creditors to the Church of England. They are the creditors to the City of London. They are the creditors to Elizabeth II. whether that's in a birth name or not. In fact, you are the creditors to the principalities. You are the creditors to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The credit is also another word for security. And the commission is that you commissioned the Securities and Exchange Commission to commission your securities amongst themselves, what they call an exchange. Hence the word Securities and Exchange Commission. You are in fact the creditors of the Vatican Church. You are the creditors of every single bank on this planet, including the Bank of England, including the Federal Reserve Bank. You are the creditors for the monies that every president, prime minister on this country gets, every politician on the planet. You are the creditors for the transport systems, for the technologies, the space stations. I would draw the space stations for satellites, communications, technologies, cars, research, as well as weapons and armaments. Which means the people that I've mentioned, the banks, the technologies, the cars, the transports, all these people and all these companies that I have mentioned are actually indebted to you. They are actually indebted to you. In other words, the chieftain is indebted to you. The lords are indebted to you. You understand what I'm saying? The chieftain is only your chieftain if you have consented. And from your silence, you have consented. You understand what I'm saying? I have no chieftain. I'm a chief, but of technology, Miller's technology, and of bureaucracy, not over men. But I am able to enter all realms of the world, all 13 realms, albeit 12 realms. That's one of my gifts. And as a result, I'm able to take over the Crown copyright. The debtor, ladies and gentlemen, the debtor knows that they have an enemy. And the enemy of the debtor is the creditor. Do you understand what I've said to you? The debtors, the chieftains, the lords spiritual and temporal, the commonwealth, the principalities, the corporations, the car companies, the technology companies, the transport companies, are all debted to the creditor. If they know this, if the debtor knows this, they know their creditors obviously are my enemies. They are their enemies because they have to pay you back. If you are dealing with highly pernicious people that have understood that the hand that has fed them, they are now looking at that hand as the enemy. Because that same hand that has been feeding them for 99 years wasn't aware that they were feeding them for 99 years. They never knew they were giving aims for 99 years. The debtor knows people like me will always emerge. We are a natural function on this planet to educate you. You understand? They know I'm coming and I'm educating you. You see, the debtor has to pay back to the creditor if they have the funds and the means. And they have the funds and the means. They have the funds and the means. That's the law. They have to pay back the creditor. And if the creditor looks upon the hand that feeds them as the enemy, what lengths will they go to get rid of the creditor? Think about it. What lengths will they go to get rid of the hand that has fed them for 99 years? And the creditor now begins to understand that they need to get their money back. As we speak, there is a great awakening on this planet, on this earth, this world, psychologically, monetary-wise as well. Do you understand why they went to such great lengths to destroy blockchain, Bitcoin? Do you understand why they started the war of block size? Because they knew they're going to get caught out. You see, what I have learnt from all the people that I've encountered, every time I've helped them, these are the individuals. A large percentage of them looked upon me as the enemy because they were indebted to me. And they thought, this guy must be our enemy because we need to pay him back. Even though I did not ask for anything back. It is the nature of these monsters called humans, these monsters, to think and behave that way. It is hard to believe, is it not? This is how their minds work. Quite literally, this is how their minds work. I've had students, ladies and gentlemen, especially one Canadian gentleman. He lives kind of in the wilderness, if you like, off-grid as it were, and he took in a homeless person. And that homeless person was troublesome. I warned him of it, as I have warned other students of mine that are kind-hearted have done that, because I've done it myself. And they get a little bit too friendly and they start stealing things. They begin to get too friendly with the wife or the girlfriend and makes the girlfriend feel, women have a sense when something is terribly wrong. Yeah. And they've kicked them out. And this one particular one planted a gun in one of the drawers, a kitchen drawer, hid it, called the police and said this man has a gun, and he got himself arrested. And the police entertained it all the way through until he had enough warmth to fight it back. You see, there are deadly consequences for helping people that you don't know. In the Middle East, they have a way of dealing with these things. When people are in need, you can look after them for 3 days, and after 3 days they have to leave. Yeah, that's aims, a reasonable level of conduct for your fellow man. I have found that quite a large percentage of the people that I've helped is actually incredibly toxic. You see, we ignore the fact that they tell us that this has happened to them, that has happened to them, that this person did this to them, that we believe that their case is a true one and not that there were ever any real reasons for those things to happen. But in reality, you quickly find out the reason why they were kicked out from wherever they were is because they were extremely toxic. You see, ladies and gentlemen, mankind begins to see the Lord spiritual and temporal for what they are. It's a natural course of events that when you have a lobotomy, nature will find a way of healing it. Nature will begin to find a way of reversing the psychological damage that was done to you through trauma, through school, through education, through childbirth, and etc. Have you ever wondered why they cut the umbilical cord without the placenta being fully emptied into the baby? Because you get a partly disabled baby that cannot think for itself but is totally dependent. A baby that is born with all of the placenta emptied out into the baby is one heck of a baby. It is a baby fully functional, fast healing, fast growing, fast thinking. Do you know what will happen if you cut the umbilical cord of a lamb that's being born on a farm? You'll get a disabled, a weak lamb. If the farmer finds you cutting an umbilical cord before all the placenta empties itself out into the baby or the lamb, the farmer will attack you because he knows what you are trying to do to the lamb. You are trying to make it weak and disabled. The trauma, ladies and gentlemen, is practiced in your hospitals. The information that I am releasing for you is of great value to you. Download it, upload it onto your YouTube, share it amongst itself. It's free source. It's free source. Don't you ever allow no piece of thing calling itself doctor to cut that placenta cord, the umbilical cord, until the placenta is fully emptied out into the baby. Otherwise, it's going to become immune deficient. It's going to be psychologically deficient, and all manner of disabilities that you may not visibly see. You check it out, what I've said. All these technologies is coming your way. Number 9. Alex has cracked the code on how to identify and deal with these subspecies, calling them, which are categorized as being narcissists, psychopaths, sycophants, and all of these other psychological conditions, including stupidity. Stupidity is probably one of the worst characteristics I've come across. Narcissists and psychopaths are extremely deadly, but stupidity has a whole element of its own. I encountered it on a man called Leon. If you ever wanted to understand what a jinx was, and our grandfathers knew what this was, he's it. Destroys everything that he touches. Everything. Everything. Quite an extraordinary statement. There's even been books written on, actually not books, but one particular book on identifying stupidity. And I spoke about it, but unfortunately I have previously spoken about it, and I have forgotten the title of it. But that's a very powerful book. That was a very big, eye-opener for me to realize that a stupid person can be more destructive than enemies at your gate. The Arabs have a saying, better a formidable enemy than a stupid friend. Let me say that again. Better a formidable enemy than a stupid friend. Wow. That's like me saying it is better to have a man with a knife kicking my door down rather than have a stupid friend in the house. We know that these subspecies exist. We know that they exist for real because the Canadians confronted them and they showed themselves to be what they are. Have no mistake, every sheriff, every constable knows exactly what he is and what he's supposed to do for his chieftains. Have no mistake about that. And yes, 20% of them, which is called the 20-80% ratio, the 20% are good, because without that check in place, the entire system would collapse, and that's tightly balanced. What I'm saying to you is quite literally that every judge, every attorney, that every police constable, every one of these things know exactly what they are. And they are handpicked and selected to be either monstrous or the most kind-hearted men and women on this planet. It is by selection. So this training will be held by Alex for my Tricks and Traps students, as well as those people that want to join. Okay, and yes, you do need to pay for it, except my Tricks and Traps students. This is a critical part of your training, because if you are not aware that the Lord spiritual and temporal are parasitical, narcissistic, psychopathic, they're going to play the same trick on you. You need to know the tricks and traps that psychopaths, narcissists, stupid people set up for themselves as well as for you. You need to know that, because if you're going to walk down your garden that you've never walked down, you've never actually walked outside of your own doorstep, I promise you haven't. You just think you have. There is about 50, 60 traps there set up for you to fall. The Canadians have been falling into it for so long that they have had enough. I forgot to also put myself back onto full screen. I beg your pardon. But I think I've made it very clear. It might actually be what they call a Freudian slip, as it were, to keep that open for the Canadians to actually see what the hell province actually means. People that live in provinces are part of an empire called subjects. And the British quite literally are saying, you lack sophistication and culture. That's like basically saying we're going to treat you like SHIT. So that's a critical part of the training which will take place in a couple of weeks' time, if not 3 weeks' time. I will reveal that date to my Tricks and Traps University students, as well as the world at large. You need to understand what psychological types are. I have a phenomenal level of understanding of psychology. Quite literally. Alex also understands it and has a solution to these subspecies. First time in history that's ever going to be taught. The rest is all about mitigation. The therapists out there talk about mitigation, how to deal with it, as it were, as being a victim, rather than being able to put them to a stop and dealing with them successfully. Have no mistake, the owners of the Commonwealth practice and do exactly what these individual people do in your lives. Their method of operation is no more sophisticated than that man putting a gun into the kitchen drawer of his benefactor to have him arrested. As simple as that. I've explained to you the power of the 500, which is the ability to vote in whoever you want, or elect in whoever you want, so they can do the things that they need to do in order for your corporate governance to become your servants. That entire mechanism can also be done in what is known as a write-in, which what David Wayne Miller taught me about. Very simple to follow. Number 12. I proved to you, the entire world, that you have a genie, and that it is of paramount importance that you grasp this genie. I will give you the 100% proof now, even though I have spoken about it before. Another word for a genie, ladies and gentlemen, is a genetic code. It contains everything that you need to fulfill your wishes, quite literally. And it is dramatically explained to you in movies by the whirling thing, which is representative of the genie, going in and living in a teeny little weeny space, as Will Smith puts it. The genie has power of all the universe. All the universe means all the verse, all the universe, all one verse. But it lives in a tiny little weeny space called a cell, in each one of your cell. That genetic code is one of the greatest expressions that you have, called epigenetics. So all those people that preach about epigenetics, translate it into what I am saying, which will give you much more greater depth and explanatory reach than you have ever been given. The genetic code contains everything that you need to make your wishes come fulfilled. And the images that you see of the 1001 movies that has been made is about how it creates genetic expression and how it folds itself back into that lamp. Every time you are being genuine, the word genuine comes from the word genie. The genuine word comes from the word genetics. Sorry about the listing. All means one thing. Every time you are being genuine, that's your genie. Every time you are being genuine, that's your genie at work with you. Now you're doing it. Every time you are being generous, every time that you are being generous, that is your genie. That is your genetic code unfolding itself to perform that task. Every time that you are being authentic, that means you are being autonomous to control your genie. Every time you generate wealth, every time you generate wealth, understanding, power, love, every time you exercise this generosity, this generation of people, of electric generation, that is your genie at work all the time. And the Lord, spiritual and temporal, through the twisting and the lying of the words, got you making wishes for them. The Lord's Prayer. The Lord's Prayer. What does the Lord mean? Church. Say the Lord's Prayer to yourself. I no longer want to say it. That's how the Archbishop of Canterbury stole your prayer, stole your genetic code, your DNA. That's how they stole your wishes. That's how they stole quite literally, your blood. By all the means that I have described. Every generation is the genie. Every time you generate power and knowledge and books, every time you do anything, you are generating. Every time you work, you are generating. And they remove that without you knowing, through hypnosis and words and the means that I have spoken about from you, into their coffers. Coffers is another word for a coffin. You understand what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen? Within your reach, you now know every time you generate wealth, the Lord, spiritual and temporal, want to take it from you. That's how they captured your genie. That is how they captured your genuinity. That is how they captured your authority. That is how they captured your generation. You now know about it, and you also know what to do about it, because it's all done through consent. You want to know who the chieftain is in City of London? Let me see if I can dig it up. It'll be very easy for you to find if I don't have it here. Those are the Canadian provinces, which you now know. It should be here. Look, hidden away, Chief Commoner. See? Chief Commoner. Brian Mooney. Mooney means lunar, a shadow. Okay, that's who that is. You can write to him. Okay, if you was to examine what's here, you'll break a lot more code. One of the things that they hold integrity over is the system of court, as in Queen's Court, King's Court, Coroner's Court, People's Court, Tennis Court. It's all one jurisdiction. All one jurisdiction. Understand it and you begin to crack codes. You see, ladies and gentlemen, as much information as I'm giving you, there is one more that I'm going to give you. There's one more. I've tied every single one of these 13 elements, the constellations as they were under a fiduciary, all tie into each other. My greatest apprehension when I heard about it through a champion of Bitcoin, whose name I don't want to mention, but he is so famous and is extremely wealthy and he's put his all money in it, and he does a wonderful job of educating people. That's where I learnt it from. They nearly corrupted. They nearly corrupted blockchain through their block size wars. And they're trying to corrupt you with the silent weapons for quiet wars. The quiet wars is the cyber war. The silent weapons is the lies that the media, politicians tell you. Those are the silent weapons. Like the whispering of a lie. I think you guys understand. Your genie is yours. It's yours now because it's been fully educated. You see, when you educate the mind, that part of you that was sleeping, that was dormant, like a dormant gene, is now fully alive. It's come alive. It knows it's been lied to. It knows its body was hijacked by a lie. Now the Lord spiritual and temporal has to deal with your genie, coming for them. What's the chances of them, a parasite, a pinworm in your backside? What power is the genie going to unleash? You see, ladies and gentlemen, Christ was correct. A lie begets a lie. That's the kernel. That's why they are the non-starter. They never told the truth to begin with, and their lies is about to completely and utterly suck everything out of them until you see them for what they are, featherless canaries. Number 13. There is in every single mythology, including the Matrix, a thing called the One. I have spoken about it, but I want to make it very clear, as much clear as I can. The strength of the One is that it has the ability to work with the strength of the other 12. I would like to use the word characteristics, but it carries too many connotations. But the strengths of the different species of men and women is what the One is able to work with. It's able to bring them together. That's called the 13th. That's the power of the 13th. It's no special gift, but it has the ability to do that. Every time a council is formed, that's what happens. And I want to demystify this for you, because the power, not the strength, but the power of the One is incredibly simplistic. Because all it does, the power of the One, let me phrase it as poetically as I can, to the point as possibly as I can. The power of the One is that all it takes is any one of yous out there to stop and correct the Lord's spiritual and temporal. If you ever wanted to know how the Archbishop of Canterbury is living off of your sweat equity, it's because that's the medium that they use to rob you of your genie. You see, he has no spirituality. It is a walking, talking vacuum. Just as Elizabeth II, just as all of these lords in the House of Lords, just as the temporal, which is Parliament, out of their temple bars in the city of London, their inner temple, the outer temple, they probably even have a big McDonald temple. They are comics. The chieftains out of Africa, one of them being Mugabe, you can see his documents on my website, is a chieftain. They are featherless chickens, featherless turkeys. You understand what I'm saying? That's all they are. The chieftains are just featherless canaries, budgerigars. I don't want to insult budgerigars, but please forgive me, budgerigars and canaries. Liken one of yous with one of these chieftains is an insult. I understand that. Please forgive me. I don't wish to insult the animal kingdom. That is to say, the dominion of these animals. That is the 13 things that I have to say, the critical things that you need to know in this open mic broadcast to be shared with the entire planet, downloaded and uploaded onto your YouTube to keep it safe, to understand that I have broken the codes on it. And the power of breaking a code is that when you reveal a magician's trick, and the magician can no longer perform that trick. In other words, he has no magisterium. He has no majesty. He has no magistrate. He has no HMSC, no HMR revenue, no His or Her Majesty's service. There is no majesty. There is no chieftain. There is the people, which are autonomous, who have their own corona, called a crown, on their head. That's the world that we have been successfully birthed into. Full stop. I would like to ask for people out there, which I have done previously, for biographers to come forward to help me write out the things that I need to as part of a biography. For the biographers, of course, will pay you for it. I'm not expecting people to do something for free. So professional biographers that are out there, please contact me. This is only because I do not know how to go looking for one, and I have tried and I'm not very successful. So this is an offer, and I'm looking for professional biographers that have beautiful narrative pens. That's one. For people that want to do voiceovers of a particular book called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, I really need somebody to do that for me and just send it to me. Yeah, send it to me. Complete it. And I'll upload it, my favorite one. And I will take those ones that other people that have done, and I will distribute it amongst my subscribers, as well as on my email. And of course, you will be credited for it. And if you don't want to be credited and you wish to remain anonymous, I will respect it. I can't pay you any monies for that, but if you ask me for something, let me know and I'll do that for you. Okay? I don't have very much to say apart from on the voiceover of the book Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. It's a very simple thing to do. You can either do it synthetically or use your own voice. But I really do need that. Okay? And people are sending me samples of it, and thank you very much. But I really would like you to just do it and send it to me. Yeah, and it has to be of a reasonable quality. Yeah, so, and a feminine and a masculine voice will go down very well. The reason why that is because that is a very powerful book, and it is better for people to have it narrated, spoken about, read out, as it were, like an audio book, rather than them reading it, because unfortunately people don't have very much concentration levels because their placenta cords were cut while the placenta still held all of its energy. The placenta contains enough nutrients, which is life-saving for the development of the baby for 3 to 4 days without being fed. When you cut that, you essentially have robbed the baby of the necessary nutrients that it needs to be able to be fully functional to suck on the mother's tit. You know, what I have just said to you is such a crime against mankind. It should take one letter to stop them, and I wish somebody would pen it for me and send it to me. I wish 1 million of you would pen that pen to stop these hospitals from doing such a thing. It's a hideous crime against man. And if they don't stop it, you must go after them by saying this carries a death penalty. You have injured and you have harmed my baby. You have willfully disabled my baby. I promise you there is not a single rat, cat, dog, squirrel, monkey that will allow you or any other animal to ever harm its baby. It will fight tooth and nail. What the bloody hell happened to you people? Well, you know what happened now, and you know how to fix it. That's the voiceover. Do me a favor. Do it and send it to me, and I will make use of it. I make use of everything that people send to me. I really need that. Mankind really needs that. I wouldn't ask it if I didn't need it. I also need a storyboard artist. This is what the film industries would use to narrate the story as the director wants it told. Okay, so let me just pluck up a book here. Yeah, okay. So, I studied the film industry, okay, and I'm just going to give you a quick example what I'm talking about. I actually studied to be a filmmaker, as well as theology and a few other things. But I'm just giving you an example what a storyboard artist would do. I'm just trying to I had a book on the Matrix, it cost me like $200 or something. And it's beautifully narrated. In fact, there is no script to the Matrix. It was all storyboarded. So they would look like something like this. Okay. That's the beginning of a storyboard. And it's very easy to tell stories on the back of these boards. It'd be like this. But I expect a higher quality. Any storyboard artist there that wants to work with me, and you have to do it face to face, so it will have to be London based, I'll be happy to do that with you. And I need that for a narrated book that I want to put out there for my students and my subscribers. Okay, so that I would be much appreciated if you can come forward. So it's an offer. You guys accept, we can have a chat, then we can take it forward. Okay, that is that, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you have enjoyed this presentation. Please note, I'm very grateful for the 91,000 subscribers. Also note that the people that are out there that don't want this information to come out, there's a good chance, because it's coming up to 100,000 subscribers, which is a milestone, as it were. They may try to interfere with the channel, because I'm making my mark on this planet. You understand what I'm saying? So download these videos, these public videos, not private ones, not the private ones, the public videos. And there are 401 of them. There are 401 of which I've done. Download them and upload them to your own channels. Share it amongst yourselves. Open up channels, whether it's in BitChute or YouTube, and upload them. Okay? You've got to keep this knowledge safe. Check the internet. You'll find this type of knowledge does not exist anywhere else. This is not because I'm gifted. It's because that's how strong the control mechanism is. Remember, there is people here with billions of mortgages, debt pledges, which brings them in trillions of dollars per day. Yeah? It doesn't mean very much for them to pay £500-600 a month or a week to individuals to interfere with what I do, or even have 1,000 people working against me. Yeah, you understand what I'm saying? These people can print as much money as they want. They can just simply hire 100,000 people and pay it by just printing it off. I can hire 1,000 people if I wanted to now. Now, if I wanted to hire 1,000 people, I could do that, as long as they're willing to accept my IOUs, which is what the Federal Reserve Bank notes are, which is what the Bank of England notes are. They're IOUs. They're basically saying, I owe you. The chieftain owes you. Remember what I said? The enemy of the debtor is the creditor. The creditor needs to get wise, which is you, the people, that the debtor looks upon you as the enemy, and they have means to wipe you out. You understand why they need to get rid of you? Because they owe you. All the notes that they've been printing are IOUs, and you're having them in your pocket. You understand? Of course you do. I wish you all the best, ladies and gentlemen. I've got some serious work to do this week, next week probably as well. I had in mind to take off 90 days, or at least, prepare myself for the things I need to do for 90 days, but that's not going to work. So please wish me the best, because I need to kind of restore my health and my physical fitness and all that sort of stuff, because I've put on a lot more weight than I wanted to, and that's making me unfit. My idea was to take off the mornings and only work the afternoons and the evenings, as opposed to morning, afternoon and evenings, because I work all 3 cycles except the night. I don't work the night. I go to sleep at night. Yeah. So wish me all the best. Keep yourself safe. Get yourself educated. Qualify everything that comes out of my mouth, and you will be the master of what you do. Till next time. Bye-bye, ladies and gentlemen.